Today is March 11th, 2011, and this is Brian Gabriel continuing on my historical oral interviews. And today I'm going to be calling George Andrews in Surprise, Arizona. He's a former resident of Rock Falls, and I'm going to do an interview with him today. So I'm going to call him right now.
Hello?
Hello, George.
Yes.
This is Brian Gabriel from Menominee. So today I'd just like to visit with you a little bit about with Rock Falls, that and whatever you recall of the time when you lived there. And I'll just start asking you some questions, and if there's anything else you'd like to add at any time, just feel free. This is real informal.
Okay.
I'd like to have your birth date.
Where and when? Okay, I was born in Luther Hospital in Eau Claire on October 15th, 1929.
So how old would you be now?
I'm 81.
Okay. And where were you living, or where did you live at that time?
We lived in Rock Falls, the house just west of the schoolhouse in Rock Falls, and across the street, it wasn't there then, but the post office. The post office was built in 1936, I believe, and that's where I lived until I went off to Madison to the university in 1947.
Okay, from 1929 to 1947 you lived in Rock Falls.
And I was still around there until 1955, summers and so on, but not a full-time resident from 1947 to 1955.
Okay, I see. What was your parents' name?
My parents my father was William Andrews. My mother was Nora Thompson. My grandfather settled there in 1863, and my father and his next brother, my Uncle George, were born in Ohio, and they moved up there in 1863, and my Uncle John and Dan Andrews were born up there on the farm.
Okay. What do you remember about Rock Falls, the earliest memories you have of Rock Falls?
Well, the earliest memories that I can date, we all have these fleeting memories, but we didn't know what a calendar was or what year it was or anything when we were very young. The earliest memory that I can date was in summer of 1931. We drilled a new well on the place at Rock Falls. The water in the old well was apparently bad. It was rusty, and so they moved out back. There was an old barn on the place, and they moved out there and drilled a new well. And I can remember the commotion going on about that. The only reason I know the date of it was that years later I found my father's canceled check for paying the bill to the well driller, so I know it was 1931. Otherwise I wouldn't have any idea what year it was.
Oh, I see. Yes. So you were on the farm. You were on the farm there for a while when you were young?
No.
Okay.
My father left the farm in early 1920. He sold it to Andrew Kothbauer, and they left the farm my father and my grandmother left the farm then and moved to Rock Falls. My mother, which we will get to, I presume, also worked there for them as what they called a hired girl in those days, really a housekeeper. And she had worked for them on the farm, and she moved with them to Rock Falls in 1920. My grandmother Anders died in 1924, and my father and mother got married shortly afterward.
I'd kind of like to know, what was Rock Falls like when you were growing up? I mean, who, if you wanted to start on one end of town and just kind of, if you remember who, some of the people that lived there or some of the businesses?
Well, I can try that, yes. Let's start down on the west end, south of the main street through Rock Falls, Highway 85. The first place actually in the town was Mrs. N.P. Johnson. She was a widow of Nels Peter Johnson, otherwise known as Pete Johnson, and he had run a blacksmith shop in Rock Falls. Moving on in toward the mill pond and so forth, on the south side of the road again, was Vern Norrish, and his wife lived there. They were the earliest ones there. The next place I remember, and I'm not sure whether that house is still there. The first people I knew there were Jack and Elma Belden. Then the next place after that, I might add that Belden house, they moved out, and Glenn Massey occupied that for many years after that. Then going on to the next place, I think the house belonged to the Hart family. The first people I knew living there were George and Bernice Hintermeyer. Then the next place was the garage there. And this was run by Art Hart, and he lived next door with his sister-in-law, Mrs. Ed Hart, or Clara Hart. This was the house which was occupied in my first memory by the George Hintermeyers. The next building then, and right up to the mill pond, was a kind of a garage, and downstairs stable, and a barber shop on the edge of it. That was owned by Dan Andrews and the mill. The barber shop was, as I remember, was always run by Wilson Giermeyer. Now we're at the edge of the mill pond there, so I'll go back to the west end of Rock Falls and start on the north side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
The first place there was up on the hill was at that time the Glenn Massey farm. I don't know who lives there now, and Glenn has left there a long time ago. I don't know who followed him there. The next place coming up that street was well, first it started out as a basement, and then they moved the old Oscar Spurson's house down there and put it on that basement. and various people lived there. I think Roy Cooper lived there for a time, somewhat later. The next building on that street, and this was on the side street and the intersection of Main Street, was a blacksmith shop. That was N.P. Johnson's blacksmith shop. Years before that, much before my time, it was run by somebody named Wygant. Then going up this side street to the north, on the left, was the one-story house. Leonard and Betty Van Holt lived there at the time when I knew Rock Falls. Kind of across the street from that was the town hall, the old town hall. And coming back down toward the highway was another house there that was usually rented out. I'm not sure who owned that house. The first people I remember in it were Dave and Alice Shively and Cliff Bradshaw, who also ran that blacksmith shop, lived there later. Then in front of that was that rather fancy tile-built gas station, originally Tidal Vidal Station, later operated under the name of Husky, and Art Berg ran that as far back as I can remember. Now moving again east on Main Street, the next house was the house connected with the store. Oscar and Mame and Hank Krogstad lived there. Oscar and Hank and later Fred Krogstad ran the store on the west side there. That was the location of the old original Chamberlain store, but that building was later. Somebody else had built that. Krogstads were the first ones I knew there. Then it was followed by Solberg, ran it for many years. Gordy Hennemeyer's wife ran it, and I don't know who has it now. The next house there was, again, I'm not sure who owned this house. Moving east again. The first people I knew there were the Stevers, Gora, Eleanor, Edna, Tina, I think, lived there too. Later, Oscar Berg lived in that house for many years. Then the next house was the big house up on the hill, which was Dan and Rena Andrews. And then coming back down toward the creek and down toward the dam was the Rock Falls Mill. Now we have covered the west side.
No, George. Yes, George.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question about the mill?
Yes.
Now, it was it Dan Andrews that ran the mill, and he was related to you, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Dan Andrews owned and operated the mill, and he was my father's brother.
I see.
And they took the Andrews family took possession of that mill shortly after 1900, and Dan ran it for many years. It was after he died, his son-in-law Bud Smith ran it for years again, and finally sold it to the Durand Co-op place, and they ran it for a while, and it eventually burned down, as you know. So, Now, do you want to move on up to the east side?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll go back to the south side of the road again. The first house up the hill there. Well, the first place just east of the mill pond was the big ice house, and that was on Dan Andrews' property. I guess he owned it and ran it. I don't know who actually operated that. Then going on up the hill, the first house up there, in my memory, was a kind of a bungalow house, and it was first dwelled in by Dan Andrews' son Harold Andrews and Francis, his wife. Later it was rented for a year to a fellow from the Menominee named Otto Edgeberg, and then Dan Andrews' daughter Mildred and son-in-law Bud Smith lived there for many years after that, and I think Lemoyne Moser bought it from them. Okay, now let's head south of there. On the side street and on the back street, right back of there was a farmhouse. When I first remember it, was rented to the John and Maisel Turner family. It was actually the old Will Norrish farmhouse, and Will Norrish's barn was across, and so on. Then off to the right was a little house owned by Art Hintermeyer, which burned down and was replaced by the larger house. That's really the only house fire I ever witnessed completely in Rock Falls. Now back to Main Street again, past the Harold Andrews Bud Smith place, was our house, which was bought by my father from Enoch Hoover in 1920. He lived there until his death in 1936, and my mother lived on there until 1968, I think. Then we come to the schoolhouse, and behind the schoolhouse was Will and Flora Norris's newer residence, which they moved to and were living when I was young. Now, following the east on Main Street was the Rock Falls Union Church, and that had been there for a long time. Sometime, I think in the 1920s, they jacked it up and put a basement on it, put a belfry on it, and put a bell in it. It was just a plain meeting house type of building before that. Now there's a side street going there, heading back between there and the next house, which was the George Day house. The George Day house was interesting in that it was a near duplicate of the house where we lived in, which had been built earlier. Apparently George Day admired that house so much that he built his house on the same plan with some modifications. So it's almost a twin of the house where we lived to the west of the schoolhouse. Then going on down the south side of Main Street, the next place, and I don't know who built this house. It was a bungalow type of house, one story. which was owned by Phil and Mary Melrose, and later his son Jack and Emma Melrose lived there. Going on down next, it was the house of Gail and Lucy Day. Then the last building on Main Street before the junction of County H coming into town was an old barn which belonged to Harvey Day, and it was never used. It was torn down later after I left, and a gas station was built on that corner. I guess we'll go on out to County H south on the west side. The first house there was Henry Berg, and he operated a shoe repair business in the back of the house. Henry and I forget his wife's given name. Later, Art Berg and Gora lived in that house. The next house on that street actually belonged to Glenn Day, the son of George Day, but in my time it was always rented to someone. The first people I remember there were Oscar and Clarice Bursted. Then the Stevers, Gora, Eleanor and Edna, and I believe Tina rented it. And then the following house, which was the last house on that west side of the street, there was built by John Engie after he retired from the farm. He and his wife built that house and lived there for several years until they died. At that time, that was the last house I can remember that house being built. Now, if we want to jump back to the east side of County H, on the corner there was a kind of a rambling garage building entitled the Midway Garage. And I don't know who built that, but it was operated by a fellow named Bill Rissler, as I first remember. Then Ray Warrenberg operated it, and both Rissler and Warrenberg lived in the house immediately south of there. Later, that house was occupied by Alex Radel, and later by Joe Hoover. And Joe Hoover, after he got here, the garage was pretty derelict by then. He cleaned it up completely and removed every trace of it from that corner. And then the last place to the south on County H in Rock Falls was the farm of Lester and Mildred Norris. Now we're down to the park, which is now the park there. That was a kind of a park land. Lester used it to run his cattle as a cow pasture in that woods there where the park is now. Now the town hall fits in down there somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where. The new town hall on the other side of the street, I believe. Okay, back. We'll start on Main Street again. Now I know there's some houses built off to the east there, but I don't know them well. The first building I remember, kind of at the T road of County H and the Highway 85, was the creamery.
Do you
immediately next,
George?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember the creamery being operated?
Oh yes, yes. The first butter maker whom I didn't know was a fellow named H.K. Hansen, and he was followed by his son Alan Hansen, and I believe that he was followed by James Millsby, and I'm not sure after that, somewhere along the time, Dwayne Telford took that job as butter maker there too. There was a little office off to the east of the main creamery where the business office and Norman Shaker worked in there. Just across from the driveway of the creamery was Harvey Day's hardware store, small hardware store. He ran it for many years. He and Katie ran it, and his son Ori and wife Hattie ran it after that. Then the next building up, going west on Main Street, was originally the old Catholic Church. That was there until about 1940 or 41. Then the Catholic Church built a basement there, which they equipped to worship in for many years after that, actually, and until they finally built the present church on top of the basement. The old horse sheds around the Catholic churchyard, I don't know whether they're still there or they've fallen down or torn down. Going west again on Main Street was what was the buttermaker's house. I don't know who built that house. I don't know whether it was built by the creamery for the buttermaker or not. The earliest person I know of was H.K. Hansen, who lived there later. Alan Hansen, whom I remember, Alan Hansen and Edith McCart. And then Millsby lived there. And after that, I don't know who lived there. The creamery went out of business. I don't know where the ownership of the house went.
Do you know when the creamery went out of business?
No, I don't really. It was after 1947, I believe. I think it was still in business while I was in Rock Falls. But after that, I came and went, and I don't know. I think possibly within the next 10 years. But I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay. The next place was the Day store, which was operated by George and Minnie Day and their sons Gail and Merle, which most of us call Shorty Day. And the Days also had they lived across the street from the store. They also had a daughter, Marie, who had been crippled early in life with polio. But essentially, when I knew the store, it was being run by Gail and Merle and Minnie Day. George Day had a stroke and was no longer able to function there. I don't know when this happened, the early 30s sometime. All I remember of George Day that he used to sit out on the porch of the store and greet his customers, and I'm not sure how well he could speak, but at least visit with them a little bit if he could. That store had two sections to it. The old part was on the west side. It was kind of a high, false-fronted store building. The newer part was on the right side, and it contained they put in a soda fountain and meat coolers and things like that in the newer side. When I was young, the old side had been closed off and just used for storage. The new side was the operating part of the store. Then later, after the REA came through and we had reliable electricity service, they cleaned out the old part of the store and built the locker plant in there. And I suppose this was about 1941 or something like that. And that operated for many years afterward. I understand the store has been burned down sometime and is no longer there. Next place down the line to the west was the implement shop property. First, a house early on was a small one-story house occupied in my time first by Carl Spurston and later by Oscar and Clara Spurston. They replaced this house by that nice two-story Lannon stone house, which is still standing there. West of that was the implement shop. I'm not sure who built this implement shop. Before my time, it was run by, I think the earliest one that I heard of was George McDermott, and then later by Les Spalding. And the only people I actually remember running the implement shop were the Spursteds, Carl and Oscar. Carl left somewhere along the line and left the business to Oscar, and Oscar and his son Jack later ran the implement shop there. Then moving on west, when I was very young, that whole tract of land between there and the creek bank was empty. But Ray Helgo moved a building in there in 1936 and set up the post office. The post office department consolidated the old post offices at Caryville and Marydean and rejiggled the whole thing and put a post office in Rock Falls. And the division was more complicated than that. The Rock Falls didn't get the sum total of the territory of those two post offices. There were parts split off to Eau Claire and parts to Mondovi and parts to Durand. But they did set up the post office in Rock Falls. It was Ray Helgo as postmaster. They had originally two carriers, Gilbert Jevany and Chester Wheeler, out of that post office, but they soon decided they could get by with one rural mail carrier, so Gilbert Jevony had the carrier from Mary Dean had seniority, so he got the job, and Chester Wheeler moved down to Nelson, Wisconsin. After Ray Helgo was in there, he put in that pheasant bird cage and so forth west of the house. Had some very interesting exhibit birds and fancy pheasants in there for a while. Later on, he built that gas station just east of the creek bank, just at the top of the hill above the bridge on the north side. Now we're back to, I think we've covered the town. We're back to the Rock Creek Gorge and the dam there. I think I've covered everything. I probably missed some things. One observation I will make, I sat down the other day and counted up the number of gas stations in Rock Falls. People and businesses that had gas pumps along the street there at the height of the gas selling business in Rock Falls. There were actually 8 businesses selling gas along Main Street in Rock Falls at one time.
Really?
Now there are none.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that automatic pump out at the co-op west of town is still operating or not.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Did you ever hang out at the old feed mill? At the mill?
At the mill.
Yeah.
I was down there, of course, particularly when my father was still alive. He used to like to come down and visit with his brother Dan down there, and there was a chance to walk down to the west side of town. He'd take me along, and they had a little area outside the office in there with a bunch of chairs sitting around the old stove made out of an old furnace boiler or something like that, anyhow, that heated the mill. And these old men used to sit around and gab down there, and I used to sit there and listen to them. I never did any work down there or anything like that. I did get upstairs once or twice. They had a bunch of old machinery up in the upper floors. There was, as I know it was only a grist mill grinding feed for farmers' animals. But it had grown flour earlier in its time, and I guess they could no longer compete with the big milling firms like Pillsbury and Gold Medal and so on. They used to sell flour down there from these manufacturers, but not in my time did they actually grind flour at that mill.
I see.
It was set up originally with old stones, and they took them out of the mill, and Dan set them up over along by the pond as part of a retaining wall over there. And they may be still there for all I know, the old millstones that came out of this mill. As far as the mill is concerned, I'm not sure just how this developed. I think it was run by a water wheel at one time, early when they bought it, probably. Sometime or another, they converted it to a turbine, which was undoubtedly more effective. And then I think Uncle Dan put in that new dam about 1925, and I think approximately 1927 or somewhere around there, he installed that DC generator in there to generate electricity. And the town got wired up then for electricity from that DC plant. This worked fine for a while. Of course, it couldn't, because it was DC, you couldn't transform the current up and down, so it was limited as to its distribution, but it did work for the village. The problem was that during the early 30s, 34 and 36, and the water was such a dry period. It was time of the Great Dust Bowl out west and everything. It was such a dry period even up there that there wasn't enough water to keep the turbine going and the generator going 24 hours a day. So they either had to shut it off or night. And one thing he did, he put in a early diesel engine down there and installed that to run the generator when the water got so low it wouldn't turn the turbine for the mill. And I can still remember that whole thing putting away as noisy. I don't suppose it had a muffler on it or anything, probably. The REA, of course, came through, I think, about 1941 and replaced all this with a more reliable power source than he had with that small pond and variable flow from Rock Creek. So that replaced that completely.
Right. So probably all you could run was some lights on it? Well, a person could, what could you run with DC power?
Oh, yeah. We were limited. We had two electric motors. We had an electric motor to pump water, a DC motor, and we had a washing machine, and that had a DC motor. When they changed over to AC, we had to replace both of those motors.
Oh, I see.
We had a small radio set. There was an old AC/DC set which would work on either kind of current, and so we could use the radio on either current. I can't remember just exactly how this worked, but it did work for either AC or DC, and those were the only three powered things that were affected by the DC. We only had two motors. You couldn't have anything like a electric fan in the house or anything like that at all. I don't suppose DC powered equipment like that was available. Nothing like a electric mixer or blender or anything like that at all. Even a refrigerator. We still had an ice box up until REA came through with the AC current.
Where did you get your ice?
Pardon me?
Where did you get the ice for your ice box?
Oh, well, the ice came out of the pond and was put up in that ice house which I mentioned down at on the east side of the pond down there, just just above the bridge, and that was a fairly substantial ice house, and they cut ice in there in the wintertime and fill that up, and somebody had a route delivering ice. I don't remember who did it, but and many of the farmers also had their own ice houses. There was one up on the Andrews farm. I understand. I never actually saw it, and several of the farmers had ice houses, and they would put up their own ice and bury it in sawdust. It would keep generally through the summer, most of the summer anyhow.
George, can you tell me about going to school?
I went for 8 years to the Rock Falls grade school, from 1935 to 1943. There was, at that time, a one-room school strictly. One teacher, of course, and I don't know whether you ever attended one of these schools or not.
Yes, I did at Meridine.
Yeah, well, then you know generally how they operated. We were divided into eight grades, and most of the time sat there and were called up for 10 or 15 minute classes for instruction and sent back again. The rest of the time sat there to study, or I think I spent more time listening to what the older grades were talking about. By the time I'd reached the upper grades, I knew pretty much what they were learning anyhow. It was I think we generally had about 15 or so pupils in school during those years. The last year I was there, they closed down the Caryville school and bused them all up to Rock Falls, and that about doubled it to 30, which was really too much. It kind of crowded the classroom and made it more difficult to keep order in the place and so on. Discipline tended to be severe by modern standards, I'm told, and one of the teachers was, if the boys got out of line, he'd take them down and give them a good shaking. And he generally sent the girls back to stand in the corner for a while if they misbehaved. Before I moved there, this may be a little off the wall, but they decided to install chemical toilets indoors, and so they divided off a storage room for upstairs for a toilet room and put the container down in the basement. And, I don't know how long they'd run this, and but it smelled up the whole building. And by the time when I started in 1935, I think they got the WPA in to build a couple of new outhouses outside, and they discontinued the indoor toilets. So when we had to go out, we went out, and that was it. I never experienced there was no plumbing in the building, of course, at all. There was not even a well there when I first came. Sometime during the years I was in school, they did drill a well out in front of a hand pump. But for water, we had to run across the street to Dave's store with a pail and bring home a pail of water to fill the stoneware water bubbler in the back of the school. Now there was another thing that they kind of made a big deal about was a hot lunch, and hot lunch consisted of a hot plate with a kettle of water, and the kids that didn't go home from lunch could bring home in a fruit jar full of soup or vegetables or something, and sit at this kettle and turn it on about 11 o'clock and heat it up. And so they had a hot lunch, and that's what that amounted to there. I don't know. There were other things. It was this was back in the days when iodine deficiency goiters were a problem, or perceived to be a problem anyhow. So every once a month or so we were all given a pill to chew, which was a kind of a chocolate flavored pill laced with iodine to prevent us from getting goiters. And I'm sure that's long been discontinued too.
Right. What other health problems were there in those days?
Well, all these childhood diseases were rampant. I didn't get any of these until I went to school. And they pretty well taken care of that. Well, they had eliminated smallpox and diphtheria. You got vaccinated for smallpox and a shot for diphtheria. But all the rest of these red measles and German measles and chicken pox and mumps and scarlet fever, I went through all of this stuff my first 4 years or so of school. And this was back before there was any immunization for any of that kind of stuff. And so you took it and hoped for the best. Including polio too, which wasn't. These other things were more or less universal. Polio wasn't. You got it or you didn't get it. But and that was the days back when they quarantined your house too. There was a appointed health officer in the town, and if you came down with a case of measles, they nailed up a sign on your door saying this house is quarantined. Nobody's supposed to come in or go out. That's all gone by the board too these days.
Right. What did you do for entertainment?
Well, entertainment in school. Well, of course, there were always, when the weather permitted, there was a perpetual softball game going on at recess, and there were all kinds of I don't know what you say, running games, tag type games, and so on that we played. I can't remember all of them. Wintertime, you made snowmen and snow forts and snowballs and all that kind of stuff. For entertainment at home, I think most everybody had, by the time I came along, most everybody had a radio. And so you could listen to that after school in the evening. There was a whole bunch of these serial adventure stories for kids, which ran after school hours. Oh, Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, and I Love a Mystery, and I don't know what all the rest of them were. they generally followed the soap operas, which were never very any interest to me at all, but they were in the after school hours for the kids basically. Then you had generally these network programs on in the evening. Some were, well, all of them were decent for kids to listen to anyhow. Some of them didn't appeal much to kids, I don't think. But there were every once in a while there was a traveling show that would come through in the summer, and these were kind of low-ranked vaudeville shows. They generally set up a tent out in front of the schoolyard and run for a night or two out there, and kinds of slapstick stuff and so on. I don't remember very well what they were. Selling cheap boxes of candy and kind of thing like that. Generally, you get one or two of them in the summertime. Not in Rock Falls, but then usually someplace around there every summer there was a circus that came through, and or several circuses, usually in Eau Claire, or sometimes they played the smaller towns even too. I remember going to one in Mondovi of all places, and I'm sure there were some other things that went on. Of course, in the summertime you had swimming in the mill pond, and if the pond froze over decently, you had ice skating in the wintertime.
I had a question. Do you remember going into, was it Solberg's store, or the store there? What was it like in the store?
Oh, in the stores, yes.
Yeah, the stores.
Well, I remember. I don't know if you remember Crockstead's or not. They were there before Solberg. I knew them better. Solberg came in shortly before I left, and the two stores in many ways were quite different. The proprietors of Crockstead's were Hank and Oscar Crockstead. Now, Hank was a real entrepreneur as far as stores were concerned. He liked to please the customer and make them happy, and so they'd come back to the store. Hank, when he'd come in there, usually at least in the summertime, he'd dip me out of a 2 or 3 dip ice cream cone and give it to me, no charge.
Huh.
And also he'd give me a box of Cracker Jacks. In those days, Cracker Jacks came in a waxed inner box and a bigger box outside with an opening in the box for the prize up at the end of the box. He'd get that down and shake it, try and guess what the prize was, give it to me, with the idea that I opened it up so he could see what the prize was himself. and he got as big a kick out of it, I think, as I did. But he gave away these things, and it kind of embarrassed my folks because sometimes we'd go down there and not buy very much, just needed 1 or 2 or 3 things, and you'd end up with a big triple dipper ice cream cone and a box of Cracker Jacks on a very small purchase. It kind of embarrassed my mother sometimes. One of the big things they had was Sunday mornings, because there was this was the days before, well, most people had cars these days, but it wasn't as handy and as easy to go into Eau Claire, Mondovi, or Durand for groceries. And there was a large-sized congregation at the Catholic Church. And in those days, the Catholics were forbidden to eat anything or drink anything after midnight before they went to Mass. And so they'd get out of Mass dried out and half starved and head for the stores to get something to wet their whistle and something to eat. And so both of these stores did a big business after church on Sunday morning. And I think this probably what kept them in business as long as they did. As soon as it became convenient to go to town and the supermarkets came in town, prices were cheaper up there, so most people loaded up in the cities, and the country stores kind of leased it away.
Right. What, George, what were the roads like in those days?
What were the roads? Well, not very good. When my earliest days, Highway 85 was a dirt road. They might have put a little gravel or something on it to keep it from developing mud holes in the worst time of the year, but not very much. They did grade them, but sometime in the early 30s they came through, and the first job on the 85 was they oiled it. Now this was not a tar job. This was a heavy black oil, and it laid the dust, but it stayed soft, and so it didn't wear very well. And when the thrashing crew came through with their steam engine, the lugs on the steam engine would tear it all to pieces. Sometime after that, they came through with a proper mix job. They mixed a tar which hardened eventually, and with road metal, and this hardened to a hard surface, and we eventually had a tarred road. Eventually, some of the county roads were tarred too, and but most of them were just dirt and loose gravel. The town roads, none of them were paved in any manner at all in those days, and they get real bad in the spring. Sometimes they go out and dig into a bank someplace and haul what they call shale and dump it on the roads. This worked fine in the summertime because it would harden up like stone practically and make a good hard surface. But it would take up water in the spring and become soup. And frequently in the spring we had some kind of we take a week off when the roads were particularly bad, and the buses couldn't run to Durand High School. They'd declare a week of mud vacation, and just after the frost went out and the roads were soupy, and until they dried up a little bit. I graduated in 1947 from Durand High School. I started high school in 1943, of course. This was during the war, with all that gas rationing and so on. And Durand offered bus service out through the country to pick up us country folk, and Eau Claire offered nothing. You can get there any way you could. So I went to Durand, and that was basically the reason. We had more or less been oriented toward Eau Claire business-wise and bank-wise and so on, and but there wasn't any chance really of with no transportation of getting to Eau Claire. We didn't have gas enough to make that trip every day, so I went to Durand, and I don't know, Glenn Hart was the principal at that time, or I guess he was called superintendent. Rudy Hansen was the principal, and I've never really regretted going there. I don't think I was any worse off going there than I would have been any place else.
So you had a good experience at high school then?
Oh yeah. Nothing too bad. Of course, everything has its ups and downs, and particularly at that time of life, you have your ups and downs, you know. But no, nothing too bad. I more or less enjoyed it, and it was quite different from the one-room grade school, of course. But
did you ever cross the ferries at Caryville or Meridean, or?
Yes and no. I was trying to think about that the other day. The old Meridean ferry, no, I don't think I ever crossed that. I know where it was, but I never crossed it. The new Meridean ferry, if I ever crossed it, it wasn't more than once or twice, and it was so long ago I can't remember. And yes, Caryville, I did cross that many times. If we ever wanted to head over toward Elk Mound or Menominee, well, that was the way we went. And I've been on that when they used gasoline power to pull it across, and when they used the current to pull it across. And I can't say I'm an expert on the operation of them, but it was interesting anyhow.
Right. You must have went through Caryville a lot. What was Caryville like in those days?
Well, Caryville, I can still remember the store down there. Trying to think of the old storekeeper's name. The old store was on the back street up in Caryville, not out on the highway like this new store. I was never in this new store at all. I remember the old, I don't know if you know about the old Woodman Hall there in Caryville.
No.
It was there was a lodge group back in those days, I think called the Modern Woodmen of America, and it had quite a following around there, and I think mainly because they had a group insurance program, a life insurance program, and a lot of people subscribed to that. And they had a lodge hall in Caryville. I can't be sure exactly where it was, and it was quite a good sized building, and it was used for dance hall and various things. I was only in there once, I think. I remember that we had some of the former Caryville people I mentioned. Chet Wheeler, who had been a mail carrier there at one time and moved on to Nelson. He and Marion were involved in kind of a local little theater group down there in Nelson. So they had a show and they brought it up to Caryville to put on in the Woodman Lodge one time. I don't remember what it was all about. I just remember being in there. And I think it was used for dance hall and a meeting hall and what have you. Long since been torn down.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, a lot of Caryville is gone now. The pickle factory was there for quite a while, and that great big building on the highway, I think it was a grain elevator or some such thing, used to have a sign on it say the J.G. Dill Company. I don't know what they did. That's long gone. And that Woodman Hall is long gone.
Do you remember the train when it went through, the steam train?
Oh yeah. I remember the train down there very well.
Did you ever ride on that? Did you ever ride?
No, the passenger service was long gone before I came along. I never rode on it. I always wished I could have ridden that line from Eau Claire to Wabasha, but I never did. They had no. I remember the depot there. It was still running, and they still handled freight there.
Where was the
telegraph clicking away in that depot in Caryville? I remember that.
Where was the depot, George?
Just west of the highway, not very far west. And one of my bad memories of that train is that I had a cousin that was killed by that train down there. I don't know. Do you know the Larson family?
Yeah, Everett Larson. I knew Everett.
You knew Everett Larson, I'm sure. Well,
yeah.
His brothers came barreling down the hill in Caryville at night, and that train was across the track with no light or anything but those two bare cross arms on it. They plowed into the train, and it killed Leslie and seriously injured Donald. And that always left a kind of a bad taste in my mouth about that train still running down there without any controlled intersection lights or anything at all. This was in 1947, I think about December of 1947. I don't know whether you heard about that accident or not.
I think I have. How about Meridine? Do you remember going to Meridine at all, George?
Oh yeah, yes, no.
Yeah.
Well, Meridine looks to me almost like a ghost of its former town. I'm sure you know more about Meridine than I've ever known, but well, they had They had a depot there. They had a creamery there. They had a brack store there. They had a doctor there. They had a bank there. They even had an undertaker there, I understand, at one time. And, of course, a garage or two. And, I don't know, probably some other things that I've forgotten about. And I kind of, when I look at it now, I wonder what became of all of it. But there's not a great deal left down there anymore, I'm afraid.
Right.
A few houses, no business at all that I know of. Maybe there's something, I don't know.
Right.
But, yeah, we used to doctor with Dr. Bedley down at Meridean.
Oh.
I think he's the only doctor my father ever went to until he died.
Huh.
And I was taken down there for all kinds of things too. And I don't know if you remember. You probably don't remember him when he was active down there. He had a consulting room on the side of the house down there. The house is still there, I think, and I don't know what they use the consulting room and he also had the shelves lined with various pills, potions, powders, and things. Really a drugstore there, because there wasn't any other around, and he compounded his own prescriptions and everything in that place. And a couple of examining tables. He actually set my broken arm for me. I was very young, and I fell down from climbing on a chair and broke my arm. So they took me down to Doc Bedley, and he set my arm. I don't remember much about it except it was terribly painful. I'm sure I screamed my head off. And he fixed it up and wrapped it up with a splint and sent me home. And I fell down again and re-broke the thing.
Oh, no.
So I had to go back and go through that again.
Oh.
Equally painful the second time. The second time he fixed me up with a bigger and better splint that time, and I didn't break it.
I suppose once in a while you would go to Durand or Eau Claire, right?
We generally went to Eau Claire.
Okay.
I knew that better than either Durand or Mondovi. Actually, I didn't know Durand very well until I went to high school down there.
Mm-hmm.
We did most of our banking work in Eau Claire at the Union National Bank up there. My dad did have a small account in that Meridean State Bank down there, which went belly up during the Depression. I don't think they lost too much because I don't think they had very much in it, but and they did get a payout. I remember they got a payout some years later from someplace from result of that bank. I don't know how much it was or anything on the thing, but that I remember that bank down there. We used to go down there once in a while for something or other. I think as I recall, the cashier's name was Martin Danielson. Why I remember that, I don't know. Otis Dahl had a store down there. I remember being in that once.
Mm-hmm.
And Rack had a store down there. I think it was right across from the street from Doc Bedley's office, as I recall. That's been long gone.
Were you ever in the Brack store?
I was in Brack's store at least once. The post office was in there too.
Oh.
And I don't know just what the setup was. I think we called in and to get some pill or something from Doc Medley, and he put it on the post office. Since it was just across the street to mail it up, but for some reason we got in a hurry and decided we needed it quicker, so we came down there. And he said, "No, I'm taking it over to the post office." So we went over there and recovered it from the post office and took it home with us.
Oh.
So that's the only time I remember being in Brack's store. I'm sure the post office was in the store someplace. That Crush store had almost anything you could imagine in there. It was all tucked away in boxes and places and so on. You go in there and ask for a pair of overshoes or something like that, or a pair of gloves or something, and they'd ramble around and dig it out from someplace in that store. Day's store, they closed up the old part, and that was kind of reduced in size. They were dealing mostly in groceries when I was young. Crockston's had at least the remnants of the original general store that was common in those places in those days.
I understand you're a geologist?
Yes. I attended the University of Madison, got degrees in geology, and I spent 30 years working for the U.S. Geological Survey in Washington area, and retired after that, went up to Pennsylvania for 8 or 9 years, and then came down here in 1998.
The Maridine Islands, or the Chippewa Bottoms, seem to keep changing all the time. The river changes, the oxbows and all this stuff. Do you know why that happens?
Oh well, yes. These channels fill up with sand and gravel, and they kind of plug up, and the water is diverted to an earlier channel that was plugged up for the same reason earlier on. It'll erode that out for a while until that plugs up and so on. You kind of have an excess of sediment moving around on the river bottoms as opposed to the amount of water flowing through. And I don't think you get the big floods anymore that you would normally have in pre-settlement days. I think they kind of scoured things out.
Maybe just to give me a little summary of your early life in Rock Falls, and what's your impression of living in a little small town and at that time?
One thing I did like about it was the access you had to that mill pond and that Rock Creek canyon down below the mill pond there. That was a great place to ramble around as a kid and observe nature and look for fossils and plants and things like that. And I did enjoy the freedom that I had to wander down there at will and do anything I pleased, more or less, on that. I was kind of limited in the number of friends I had there. The population of Rock Falls varied about 100 all the time that I lived there. my really best friends were Ralph Norrish and Vernon Hindermeyer. They were kids about my same age, and of course they're both gone now, so I don't have anybody to swap yarns about that anymore. It was kind of a small place. I think if there'd been more kids and more people around, it might have been more interesting in many respects. It was a nice, safe place to grow up. I mean, you're not worried about crime and that sort of thing. I know of only one murder historically in all of Rock Creek in Peru. Maybe there have been more, but I don't know. And generally speaking, it was a pretty law-abiding place. Now there used to be, during the Depression, there was people used to come through there and rob the stores. I can still remember some car pulled up in front of Crook's store down across the creek down there, and a bunch of hooligans entered the store to rob old Hank, and old Hank was shouting in the back, "Help, help, help." That's one of my more unpleasant memories of Rock Falls. Nobody got hurt. I don't know whether the store lost much of anything or not. Generally, people were pretty honest.
You're pretty happy the way your life turned out?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. It could have been happier if my father had lived longer. He died when I was 6 years old. And so I wish that I could have known him as an older child or a young adult, because he lived so long and had so much experience. It would have been nice to be able to sit down and talk to him about his life experiences, which of course I never had a chance to do. What does a 6-year-old kid know or care about anything like this at all? I felt I had a good education there, and I think it was an education that allowed me to proceed to the best of my abilities anyhow. So I don't feel deprived or anything like that about having lived out in the country in a kind of an isolated place.
Well, George, I really appreciate your time here and all the information about Rock Falls.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Goodbye.
Bye now.